Hello, everyone. Had some technical difficulties with the old recording from this particular lecture, and so you're going to actually get a new style recording next semester. In fact, I've been intending to redo all of the lectures in the course, partly because we're going to be using a new edition of the text, although there usually aren't significant changes with new editions, but also because I have better technology at my disposal these days, and just wanted to improve the overall quality of the lectures, which I know has been, less than positive in this particular course. So this just gives me an opportunity to start that a little earlier than I had planned when I went to put the course online. Something had happened to the recording of this lecture on YouTube, and so it was no longer available, and I just couldn't find it anywhere. So here we are. And before we get started, this is also in the weekly course content for you, but just trying every opportunity to get everybody's attention. This is the last week of the semester, and you should congratulate yourselves for reaching this point. But there are some changes that were pointed out in the syllabus at the beginning of the semester you need to be aware of because of the fact that everything ends so suddenly on Saturday, and all of a sudden we don't have a week and a half to make posts, and I don't have another half a week or so to read them and grade them, and so we have to kind of cram all this stuff in over the last couple of weeks a little more a little more tightly. And so in some classes you have final exams to worry about. You don't have a final exam in this course, but you do have some double time work to that kind of makes up for the stress that you lack because of the final exam. So in any event, both tests 6 and 7 are now open. Now, test 6 is open in last week's week 15's content as per usual, and we'll close instead of on next Sunday. We'll close on Saturday because Saturday is the last day of the semester. And test 6, quite out of the ordinary, opened with this week's learning unit. That's week 16. This is the one time when the tests are back to back, week to week. And this is opening right with the beginning of the learning unit because of the short time we have to take it. And so that will also have to be finished this week. And so between now and Saturday night at 11:55 p.m., you'll want to take both tests. And also, you'll also want to go in and make all your posts that you haven't made yet, in the last few discussion boards, as well as posting in your new discussion boards. There are some very interesting readings this week, and I really do hope that you'll take the time to read them. I know you're going to be pressed for time, but they're really good readings and well worth your time. So this last lecture, and I'm splitting this lecture up into two parts also. This is something a little different than you may be used to. And so we're going to split chapter 6 into two different parts because this is a rather meaty chapter, and it tends to pull together a lot of the concepts that we've been looking at and studying over the last several weeks, including things like, poverty and socioeconomic status and culture and all of those kinds of things. All of these, and this is why I put this at the end of the semester, I think, is because all of these topics really kind of lead you right to deviance. And this is such a good chapter. I have at times been encouraged to look at putting this somewhere else in the sequence of learning units because of the fact that there's a lot to think over and chew on in this particular chapter. But it really just seems to be kind of the ultimate direction that this course can take. And so in chapter 6 we're looking at the concept of deviance, and of course that has a very negative connotation for us when we hear that word, and once again take the sociologist's perspective on this and kind of remove your value judgments that you're sure to have, as I do as well, about deviance, and kind of look at it from more of a scientific viewpoint as we explore this topic. Deviance itself is not defined by the act. It is rather the reaction to the act that makes something deviant, according to Howard Becker in the mid-60s. And this is a very good point to make, that certain things that you may or may not do in this culture that would appear to be deviant in another culture would seem to be perfectly normal and acceptable. So that tells you it isn't really the objective behavior. It is how society and individuals around that deviant person react to that person's behavior. Very important key point to keep in mind as you go through this week. Deviance is defined as a violation of the social norms and can be either minor or serious in nature. What is deviant to some people may not be deviant to others, so that we have to really look at behaviors through the filter of the culture, the cultural lens within which it occurs. And so a lot of the things, for instance, that the Middle East is now recently has been in our scope much more than it had been previously, say in the last 10 years or so. And a lot of the things that occur in the Middle East are very different from what occur in the West. And in order to understand why those things happen, and to understand that the persons who commit them aren't simply ingrates or something like that, but that there really are reasons for these behaviors or for these things going on, you have to really understand the culture in which it occurs. So again, we don't want to use this term in a judgmental way as we go through this discussion, but rather as a more objective way. Irving Goffman was a well-known sociologist, in fact, who wrote about stigma, and he said that stigmas are characteristics that discredit people. And a person can have a stigma and be considered deviant with really without doing anything. So, for instance, an individual living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, who is of Arab extraction and attends a mosque, in the minds of some individuals would be seen as a deviant individual because they don't practice Christianity and they're not they don't have a light-colored skin, and they may be considered suspect just because of their origins. It's not that they did anything at all to have a stigma associated with it, but really it's the events that are going on around us in the world these days that have created that the possibility of that stigma. And so they maybe not even violating norms other than having a different color of skin and attending a different kind of religious service. So just by being born into this group, this involuntary group, they may have a stigma. Or people may have stigmas because they violate the norms, and not even with behavior necessarily, but perhaps because of their appearances or their abilities. And so very overweight individuals are given, we assign stigmas to people who are overweight. We assign stigmas to people who are older. We assign stigmas to people who have physical disabilities and emotional disabilities sometimes. So all of these things can result in a stigma being assigned to an individual, and sometimes connects to what we determine to be deviant about them. Now, norm is the thing that is used really to measure behaviors, I think. It is the thing, first of all, most sociologists would tell you that we have to have norms because it is the thing that makes life predictable for us. We have to have certain standards, certain expectations to know how to act and feel. And if you could imagine, and maybe it would seem like it would be a pleasure to live in a place where you didn't have expectations put on you or limitations in terms of what you do or say or think or feel. But I think if you lived in an environment like that for very long, you would begin to recognize that predictability and structure and limitations really do have a point. It helps us to get along, and rather than having to get up every morning and wondering, oh no, what's next, you kind of have a sense of what's going to go on during the day, and so you can concentrate on other things. And so norms are very important in our existence. And sometimes they're informal norms. I think we talked about some weeks ago about how, when you're walking down a street, you step to the right instead of the left. That's an informal norm. Although this goes in and out of popularity, if somebody's behind you, you hold the door for them before you complete going through it, so that doesn't slam shut in their face. That's an informal norm. There isn't a rule about that. You don't get arrested for it. People may maybe scold you if they see you letting a door slam in front of somebody, but really, this is an informal norm. There's nothing written that says you have to hold them, but we learn to do that. We're taught to do that, and so that's a norm. More formal norms are things like the speed limit, and you don't take other people's lives, and on and on and on. Those things, when you violate those norms, at least then when you're caught, that's a crime, and so you get arrested for that. So all of these things help to bring about the social order, and this enforcement of it, both formal and informal, whether it's with the legal system or if it's with your mother and father's scolding looks or your children's expectations. It's what we call social control. So what explains people who deviate from the norms? And there are different explanations for this and different classes or groups of explanations. One looks at socio-biological explanations that, really kind of looks for answers inside individuals and kind of ponders the questions of genetic predispositions, biological defects or biological imperatives, those types of things. For instance, men as a group tend to be more violent than women, and one of the groups of explanations, I suppose, that you'll often hear is that has to do with the fact that it's testosterone, which incidentally may or may not explain violent behavior. It may actually be the result of behavior, or it's our hard wiring, or it's we're bigger and we're expected to do this. We've done this since the dawn of time. Those kinds of things. Those are all explanations of a socio-biological nature that say there's hard wiring in an individual that causes this certain thing to happen. Psychological explanations focus upon conditions with the individuals, but really doesn't look to the biological aspects or the genetic aspects, but rather looks at things in their personality. And generally speaking, I think psychologists believe that the personality features that we all have are really brought about by things that occur to us. It may be brought about by some biological factors, but by and large, it's things that have happened to us that have changed the way we see the world or ourselves. And so psychological explanations for deviance may include, the diagnoses for those in prison are antisocial personality disorders, and something has occurred in this person's life that leads them to be totally insensitive to the needs of others, and usually pretty manipulative and very good at getting their own way with people. That's an antisocial personality. They used to call those psychopaths or sociopaths. That's a psychological explanation for deviance that psychologists would like to use from time to time. And of course, you've probably figured out by now that this is a sociology class, and so the sociological explanations are the ones that we're going to really look for and look at more thoroughly for the remainder of this particular lecture. And this is what happens outside individuals that causes them to be deviant. And so this looks at things like their socialization patterns and what cultures and subcultures they live in, what groups they belong to, what social class they've been raised in, what their age is, what their gender is. All of those kinds of things have something to do with sociological explanations for deviance. And so you can see that really any one of these may be valid. None of them may be valid. I mean, combinations of them may be valid. But these are just sort of the broader schools of thought when we look at deviance. So when we look at the sociological explanations for deviant behavior, what we're going to do is look at deviance through the lens of the three different perspectives. And this is one of these areas where these three basic perspectives, the functionalist, the conflict perspective, and the symbolic interactionalist perspective, all have really pretty unique and divergent explanations for deviant behaviors. And so it's one place where the three perspectives really kind of come through very, very clearly. So first we look at in the symbolic interactionalist perspective, differential association theory, and this is developed by a sociologist by the name of Edward Sutherland, who says that deviant behavior is learned in a culture in the same way that conformity is learned. It is taught or socialized, and we learn from those we associate with in our lives. So we are taught by our mother and father to behave in class, to our teachers instruct us and teach us to raise our hand when we have a question. The principal makes sure that we know that we don't leave our classroom unless we have a hall pass. When we go off into the world, we may live in a dormitory that will permit a certain range of behaviors, but there's also limits to those behaviors. Maybe looser than our home, but still not. You can't be totally wild in the dorm, and And then when you go into the work world, there's certain ways you're supposed to dress and all those kinds of things. These are all things that we're taught and socialized to do. And when we do those things, we're rewarded either with the approval of our parents or the lack of punishment from our parents, academic success in school and in college, and a good paycheck and promotions maybe at work. This is how we learn to behave, according to Sutherland. But if you have the misfortune to be raised or to be born into a family that perhaps lives in a very poverty-stricken area in downtown Baltimore, Maryland, and your next door neighbor is a crack dealer who, through practicing his trade, manages to become quite wealthy and drives a very fancy car, in fact fancier than many of the people that are out there working on the workaday world and conforming to things. What you learn to engage in deviant behavior. You learn that it's more successful for you to do things that are against the rules, and so essentially, you're socialized into this life of being a criminal. And it isn't just about criminal behavior that differential association applies. There are some people who believe that depressed people can teach their children to view the world through depressed eyes themselves as well. So in any event, you get the idea here that deviant behavior is taught, and may not even be intentional, but it is taught by the subculture around an individual, just like conforming behavior is. And it's significant to note that about half the people in prison have had a father, mother, brother, or sister that have also committed a crime. Now, that says 50-50. It really doesn't tell you too much. But I think the point of this is that there's thought to be a significant correlation between individuals who grow up with criminals in their family and those who are in prison today. Travis Hershey is one individual sociologist who advanced the idea of control theory, and control theory says that we all want to commit deviant acts. We're sort of, if you want to tie this to psychology, to a commonly understood aspect of psychology, it's sort of like the id that's pushing us to do things all the time, but we don't because of our inner and outer controls. And of course, again, if you're going to apply the Freud model there, the inner and outer, well, the inner controls would be your superego, the thing telling you to behave. But in any event, so he believes that we're born wanting to be deviant, but that we have these controls that are developed that keep us from being deviant. And the stronger the controls, the less likely deviance is to occur. So there you see the different kind of controls: conscience, the morals, religious beliefs. These are things that we're taught and are enculturated into as we grow. Outer controls are things like who you associate with, what kind of commitments you have, and what kind of investment you have in society, those kinds of things. Oops. So this ties into Reckless's theory that says that the bonds we have to society help us to maintain our inner controls and outer controls as well. And these bonds to society are based upon, he said, 4 different things, which is attachments, that is having a respect for and relationships with other people who conform to expectations. This goes back to the old thing, really. This is all about the birds of a feather flock together, or water seeks its own level. You hear all these kind of phrases about persons, and this is really about who you associate with here. And so if you're attached to people who conform, then you're more likely to develop controls on yourself. What kind of commitments do you have? Do you have a family to be responsible for? Do you have a job? Do you have some status in your community or in your circle that requires certain types of behaviors from you? And are you involved in approved activities? Do you have something to do with yourself that's constructive? And then finally, do you have a sense of right and wrong, moral sense of these beliefs that you have that can see that some things, there's just a line you shouldn't cross. So all of this really, Reckless's theory would suggest that the key to high self-control is the socialization and how you're socialized and who you associate with. So this is a little bit about the symbolic interactionist perspective and deviance. And so you get the idea then that, again, if you deviant behavior may draw out of who you're associating with. if you don't have a lot of people who have reasons to be connected to conforming behaviors, then you very well will grow up being deviant as well. If you don't have a family and a job to really give you purpose in your life and to give you a reason to keep yourself managed and consistent, then you just again, may find deviant acts to be more productive for you. There are many mornings when I get up and I think, I just like to hit the alarm and turn over and go back to sleep for a couple hours. But I know I'm expected to be at my desk at a certain time, well, some people are depending upon me to be there, but certainly there are people who expect me to be there, and so that pushes me out the door in the morning when I had sat up a little bit too late the night before. Becker's labeling theory, simply put, really is that the labels that we're assigned, and some of this is through the stigmas that we talked about earlier, the labels that we're assigned propel us into deviance or can divert us away from it. So what it is that people say about you and what you come to believe about you, it really is what you come to believe about yourself. That circular kind of thing that we talked about when we discussed interactionalist theory early in the semester. These are the things that define us as deviant or not. We have a little bit here about neutralization that really isn't directly, I don't think is directly connected to Becker's labeling theory, but I don't know. I'm not sure how it fits into it, but in any event, here it is. And there are 5 ways that people who engage in deviant behaviors manage to do this, but still reject the label of deviant. And I suppose this is how it ties in. First of all, and these are all kinds of things that, for instance, when you work with offenders, like sex offenders, for instance, these are the kinds of actions or techniques that they use sometimes to justify their behaviors or to convince themselves that what they've done, there's nothing wrong with it. Denial of responsibility. First of all, when somebody is hurt, it's not really your fault that happened. They were going to be hurt anyway. And an example of this, again, just using kind of the sex offender as an example, would be an individual who is at a party and maybe doesn't even intentionally get a woman drunk, but she gets drunk and he takes advantage of her sexually because of that. And he gets caught, and one of the things you'll hear a lot of times from them is well, she was so drunk, she should blame herself, or why was she dressing that way? She dressed so provocatively, and what does she expect somebody's going to do when she gets all, drunk and everything like that. And so this is a denial of responsibility, denial of injury, which is that it really didn't hurt her very much, or that it really wasn't that bad of a thing that I did, or that she's not a victim at all, or the victim isn't the victim, really this wasn't something bad. Sex offenders will use that sometimes with their victims, believe it or not, kids that they molest, because they're teaching them about sex, and they want to teach this child about sex from a perspective of someone who cares about them and will be careful with them. You hear that. Condemning the condemners, appealing to higher loyalties. These are other things that you get the idea then that even though individuals engage in behaviors that are deviant, they can convince themselves that they're not deviant with this sort of, they're thinking errors is what they are. Durkheim talked about deviance, and now we're moving on, by the way, to the functionalist perspective. Durkheim's explanations of deviant behavior was that it was functional because of what it does for society. But that it, first of all, affirms our moral boundaries by causing some reaction in us that's negative. It helps us to realize that a line has been crossed, and that without that deviant action, we wouldn't know that line existed. And so it helps us to know where the limits are. It helps us to be unified in that we do as a group agree on certain things, that this is acceptable, this is not. And it also can sometimes promote social change. An example there would be the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street and wherever else they were occupying. Unfortunately, now see this deviant behavior, occupying a park and refusing to leave and just living there, and unfortunately or maybe not. I don't know. It may have been by design, but most people believe that that movement hasn't been more successful. It's not done, I think, because their message is very clear to those who understand it. That is, the 1% at the top are the ones who are benefiting from society, and the rest of the 99% are victims of those 1%. That really they're the ones that control the resources, the economic resources in our nation, and they manipulate them to their own advantage, and it hurt others in the process. That's a very clear message of the Occupy movement, and yet I think a lot of the nation didn't get it because a lot of people aren't really thinking about those things, and maybe ought to think about that. Some would say that the presidential election in 2012 clearly had some implications about the 1% running for control of the country, and the other side wanting to tax the richer people and the rich people resisting that. So the Occupy movement had the potential, at least, to promote some change, to raise our consciousness, and to lead the 99% to some sort of a understanding of what the issue is, and then change things. Unfortunately, somehow it seemed to have died, and it's an interesting study. If you're ever interested really in looking at social change and really kind of exploring that topic more, if you have another sociology class and you need a paper to do, I think studying the Occupy movement, how it formed, what its intents were, what its methods were, and the outcome of that movement, why it succeeded or didn't, would make a really fascinating study. Another functionalist theory is strain theory from Robert Merton. And Merton looked at our socialization and pointed out that really all of us are born into a culture where we want certain cultural goals, but there are certain segments of our population that are denied access to institutional means to attain those goals. Translate this into kind of plain language. The way to, as I think we've learned in here, the way to move up the social ladder in our society, the legitimate way to do that is to get more education so that you can get higher paying jobs and, develop the means to have more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not all of us have access to that, and some of you listening to this lecture probably have to struggle really a great deal in order to be able to afford college classes and to keep up the rest of your responsibilities at the same time. Others of you, and I'm not saying that this is that you have it handed to you. This is the way I did it. You go to college, your parents are helping you, and your full-time attention is on your classes. Maybe you have a job on the side to help, and it's not easy either, but you're there, and you have the capacity to be there, and there are the financial resources to put you there, and the loans are available to you, and you had the intellectual capability and the right connections to find those loans or grants out there. There are a lot of people in our society who have none of that. There are people who don't have individuals around them who can connect them to grants and loans and scholarships, and may not even be aware that such things exist. And in an information society, we might tell ourselves, well, anybody could access that. You just have to sit down in front of a computer and they can find what's there if they really want to do something. And there may be some truth to that. But again, when you consider where you grow up and what you're taught about yourself, this is labeling theory, this is differential association, a lot of other things as well. You may not be in a place where you know those things or you feel that you can access those things. And in fact, you may not be able to access them because of lack of funds and things like that. And so these are individuals who are, although on television and in the store windows and on the streets and all around them, all of those things that we all want is there, and they want them too, but they don't have the same means to attain them. They don't have the legitimate institutional means to get there, and so oftentimes they revert to illegitimate means to get those same things. This is that strain, and the sense of anomie, which is is a term, a sociological term for normlessness. That is, if all of these things are out there, but I'm not afforded an equal opportunity to get there, or given any opportunity to get there. Why should I play along with this society that sets the rules up such that it's impossible for me to get what everybody wants? And so therefore, to hell with society, and I'll just get it the way I know best to get it. That's kind of a know-me. When the norms don't work for you, totally don't work for you, and this is true for many, many people in our life. When the norms don't work for you, you abandon those norms. You give up a desire to go along with them, and you go about getting things the way that you know you can get them. And now it's interesting to note that, and probably not surprising to you, that this sense of anomia is higher among lower socioeconomic groups. And don't confuse, as we talked about a few weeks ago, don't confuse race with socioeconomics. We're not talking about racial groups, we're talking about socioeconomic groups. And those of lower means tend to have a higher sense of anomia, clearly because the capitalism and the society is not working so well for them, and they have less access to institutional and socially approved means of success. So then illegitimate opportunities to success are the ones that they have to take if they're going to be successful, and this can also apply in the upper classes. And as you see, two different kinds of things develop. In the lower class, you tend to see more street crime, gang membership, maybe drug dealing, things like that. These are all things that provide other opportunities for success. Gang membership, you become somebody important in the gang, even if it's not, whatever it is that gang is doing. The gang membership affords you a status that you cannot get in regular society. So this is why a lot of times youth from lower socioeconomic groups will associate with gangs, because they have a role, they have an importance there they can't get anywhere else. In upper classes, white collar crime and fraud are the way that individuals will deal with this. And there's going to be more about this in another slide or so. But it's important to realize that white collar crime, it's not the thing we're afraid of. We're afraid of somebody breaking in and taking our TV, and we're less concerned about somebody, fraudulently using our credit card to charge thousands of dollars of things and make us responsible for it, or we're not. Or somebody who takes our investments and puts them, or lures us into making investments in things that are really kind of false things, and so these are the things that the total cost of society, the total cost is 18 times higher for white collar crime than street crime, and yet the things we really want to have punished are those lower socioeconomic groups, and more about that later. So you really have two types of crime: the white collar crime that's committed by those who have wealth and power, and corporate crimes. Some would say the collapse of the institutions at Wall Street in 2008, and really the conduct of the brokers and traders and agents and bankers since then continue to be criminal in nature, but. Then you have the street crime again, and what kind of uprising do we have about that? What kind of focus do we have on that? And that again is part of what the Occupy movement, I think, intended to draw attention to. That's the whole notion of occupying Wall Street. Wall Street being where a lot of this stuff that brought about the difficulties in our economy in the around the 2008 to 2012 period. Had to do with a lot of stuff that happened on Wall Street, but we don't get too upset about that. We don't get too fussy about that, and maybe because we don't think we have many investments there. But really, so much of what we do and so much of what we do have depends upon what's going on Wall Street, and that's an awareness that we may not have. Street crime we understand, and again, it's committed by lower social classes as a way to survive. It includes property crimes, burglaries and robberies and things like this. These are the things that we're more focused on. These are the things that we demand our law enforcement to get under control. What is the reason for that? Is it possible that we're concerned that there could be more violent crime associated with street crime than white collar crime? Perhaps. But there's a distinct difference in how we respond to these two, and this is something to keep in mind, because this could be connected to racial stereotypes and those kinds of things. This is the end of the first part of Chapter 6 lectures. Now, take a break, get a cup of coffee, smoke your cigarette, whatever you do, but come back and click on the next window because there is another lecture, the other half of this lecture, coming up. Thank you.